The rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass of our $2.8 million penthouse usually soothed me. Today, it sounded like static. My phone buzzed on the white marble island. It wasn't a text, it was an automated alert from the airline. Flight change confirmed. 2 passengers, first class, destination Dubai. I frowned. We were booked for the Maldives. 10 seconds later, the actual text arrived from my husband, Anthony. Don't go to the airport. I'm taking Sarah instead. She understands my vision better. You can stay in the penthouse until I get back, then we'll talk lawyers. I read it once. The screen didn't crack, but my marriage did. Before I tell you how I made him regret every single letter of that text message, I want to know who is listening. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from and tell me, have you ever been loyal to someone who didn't deserve it? Most wives would scream. Some would throw the baccarat vase against the Venetian plaster. I stood perfectly still. In my line of work, you don't react to a disaster, you contain it. For 25 years, I had been the silent crisis manager of Anthony's life. When he insulted a client at a gala, I smoothed it over with a handwritten note and a bottle of vintage wine. When he forgot his mother's birthday, I sent the flowers he took credit for. Now, facing the wreckage of my own marriage, that same professional instinct took over. The part of me that was a wife dissolved the moment I read that text message. The woman left standing in the kitchen was purely an architect, looking at a structure that needed to be condemned. I walked into the master bedroom, my heels clicking on the imported hardwood floors I had selected, polished, and maintained. I stopped in front of the large abstract painting Anthony had bought to impress his colleagues. He hated art, but he loved the status it conferred. I swung the frame aside to reveal the wall safe. My fingers moved automatically over the keypad. 1028, our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't have time to appreciate it. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, stacked neatly beside his emergency cash and his collection of antique watches, was a thick envelope. I pulled it out. My hands were steady. I slid the documents onto the bedspread. There it was, the grant deed to the penthouse. 7 years ago, Anthony's real estate empire had teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. He had over-leveraged himself on a commercial development that stalled, terrified that creditors would seize his personal assets. His lawyers had advised a strategic maneuver, transfer the primary residence, this penthouse, his pride and joy, entirely into his wife's name. It was meant to be a temporary shield, a legal firewall to protect the asset until the storm passed. But storms pass, and arrogant men forget the shelter they hid in. We never transferred it back. I traced my finger over the legal description, sole and separate property of Elizabeth Henley. Anthony's name appeared nowhere on the title. In his mind, this was his castle, his headquarters, the physical manifestation of his power. He brought clients here to intimidate them. He brought Sarah here, I realized with a sick jolt, to impress her. But legally, he was a guest, a squatter in a glass box that belonged to the woman he had just discarded via text message. He had made a fatal calculation. He assumed I was sentimental. He assumed I would sit here weeping among the memories until he returned to dictate the terms of our divorce. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was a businesswoman, and he had just handed me the ultimate leverage. I picked up my phone again. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call a divorce attorney. I searched my contacts for a name Anthony despised, Patricia. She was the most aggressive realtor in the city, a woman Anthony called a shark because she had beaten him to 3 prime listings in the last year. She answered on the second ring. Elizabeth, everything all right? No, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, cold, flat, and hard. I need to sell the penthouse. There was a pause on the line. Sell it? You mean list it? Ideally, we'd need a few weeks to stage it, get the photography done. No staging, I interrupted. No photography. No open houses. I want a private sale. Cash only. 48 hours. Elizabeth, Patricia's tone shifted from professional to concerned. To move a property of that magnitude in 2 days, you'd have to price it aggressively. You'd be leaving money on the table. I looked around the room. I saw the custom Italian armoire where he kept his suits. I saw the nightstand where he had left his watch. I saw a museum of a life that had never really been mine. I don't care about the money, I said. I care about the speed. I want this place sold and the locks changed before Sunday. Can you do it? I have a list of investors who buy cash for trophies like that, Patricia said, her voice sharpening with adrenaline. If you're serious, I can be there in 30 minutes. Bring the paperwork, I said. And Patricia, don't park in the guest spots. Use Anthony's space. He won't be needing it. I hung up. The silence returned to the penthouse, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like the quiet before a demolition. I walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. I wasn't packing to leave. I was clearing the decks. Patricia said 30 minutes. That gave me 29 minutes to say goodbye to the life I had built. But as I walked through the penthouse, wandering from the chef's kitchen that Anthony had never boiled water in, to the media room designed solely for watching his own interviews, I realized something unsettling. There was nothing here to miss. This wasn't a home. It was a showroom. And for 25 years, I hadn't been the lady of the house. I had been the curator, the janitor, the stage manager, keeping the lights on so the star could shine. I sat down at Anthony's massive mahogany desk. It was spotless, save for a Mont Blanc pen and a yellow legal pad. In the movies, this is the moment the heartbroken wife writes a tear-stained letter. She asks why. She begs for an explanation. She writes about love and betrayal. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I didn't write, "Dear Anthony." Instead, I wrote 2 words at the top of the page: past due. If he wanted to treat our marriage like a failed business transaction, fine. I would speak his language. I started writing, not a letter, but an invoice. An itemized list of every role I had played, without a title and without a paycheck since 1999. Item 1, crisis management and public relations. I remembered the company Christmas party in 2012. Anthony had too much scotch and told a senior partner's wife that her dress looked cheap. The silence in the room had been deafening. By the next morning, I had sent a $500 orchid arrangement and a handwritten note forged in his signature blaming a reaction to new medication. I saved his partnership that day. A top-tier PR firm charges $20,000 a month for that kind of coverage. I wrote down the figure. $3 million over 20 years. Item 2, event planning and catering. The dinner parties, the charity galas, hosted in this very living room. I designed the menus, hired the staff, managed the guest lists, and smiled until my cheeks ached while he took credit for the ambiance. Market rate for a luxury event planner? 15% of the budget. I added another $400,000 to the tally. Item 3, therapy and emotional labor. This was the big one. The late nights listening to him vent about his father, the pep talks before big negotiations, the constant, exhausting work of managing his fragile ego so he could feel like a titan of industry. A psychiatrist charges $400 an hour. I had been on call 24/7. I put down a conservative estimate, $1.5 million. I stared at the numbers. The total at the bottom of the page was staggering. Nearly $5 million in unpaid labor. Suddenly, the guilt I had been fighting, the small, nagging voice telling me I was stealing his house, vanished completely. I looked at the grant deed sitting on the desk. The cash offer Patricia was bringing would likely be around $1.9 million. I wasn't stealing from him. I was settling for pennies on the dollar. He wasn't the victim of a vindictive wife. He was the beneficiary of a discounted severance package. The intercom buzzed, sharp and loud in the quiet apartment. Elizabeth? The concierge's voice crackled. Patricia Wells is here. She says it's urgent. I tore the page off the legal pad, folded it once, and placed it in my purse. Send her up, I said. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a creditor collecting a debt. And collection day had just begun. The elevator to the penthouse was a private express car, but it still took 90 seconds to climb 40 floors. In that brief interval between buzzing Patricia up and the doors sliding open, my phone chimed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a notification from Instagram. I didn't follow Sarah, I had more dignity than that, but Anthony's profile was public and he had just been tagged. I shouldn't have looked. It was the digital equivalent of picking a scab. But my finger hovered over the screen and cold curiosity won out. The photo had been taken in the first-class lounge at SeaTac. It showed 2 glasses of champagne clinking against a blurry backdrop of luxury duty-free shops. But it was the caption that made my stomach turn. Finally, traveling with someone on my level. #upgrade, #Dubai. Sarah had tagged him. She wanted the world to know she had won. She wanted every partner at his firm, every client, and mostly, she wanted me to see that she was the upgrade and I was the obsolete model. I looked at the timestamp, posted 3 hours ago. They were in the air now, somewhere over the Atlantic, sipping vintage Krug while I stood in the wreckage of the life they had torched. Then, a new email notification slid down the top of my screen. The sender was Anthony. The subject line was simply, "Household Matters." I opened it, half expecting an apology, or perhaps a legal threat. Instead, it was a list. "Elizabeth, since you're staying in the apartment, please handle the following before I return on Sunday. 1. Pick up my navy pinstripe from the dry cleaner. The ticket is on the dresser. 2. Call Dr. Evans and cancel my dental cleaning for Tuesday. 3. The bonsai trees in the study need to be misted. Do not overwater them like you did last time. 4. Forward any mail from the Cayman accounts to my office. Unopened. I expect the place to be spotless when I get back. We will discuss the separation terms then." I stared at the screen, blinking slowly. He had left me for another woman, flown her halfway across the world on our joint credit card, and humiliated me on social media. And yet, he still expected me to run his errands. He didn't see me as a wife. He didn't even see me as an enemy. He saw me as an appliance, a smart fridge that could also pick up dry cleaning. I was a utility to him, reliable, silent, and easily put into standby mode until he needed to extract more value. "Do not overwater them," I read aloud to the empty room. For years, I had watered those trees. I had managed his schedule. I had kept his life so frictionless that he had forgotten friction existed. He thought he was a self-made man. He had no idea he was a woman-made product. I didn't feel the sting of tears this time. That part of me was gone. Instead, I felt a strange, icy clarity. He was worried about his bonsai trees. He was worried about his dry cleaning. He had absolutely no idea that in 48 hours, he wouldn't have a study to keep the trees in or a closet to hang the suit. I pressed the trash icon and watched the email vanish. "I won't be doing the laundry, Anthony," I whispered. The elevator chimed. The heavy doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing Patricia. She was holding a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a general arriving at the front lines. She stepped into the foyer, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "I have a buyer," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "But you're not going to like the number." I slipped my phone into my pocket. "Try me." Patricia opened her leather portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the marble island. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. She knew better. "The buyer is a tech CEO from Silicon Valley," she said, her voice low and clinical. "He wants a pied-à-terre in the city, and he hates paperwork. He's offering $1,900,000 cash. He can wire the funds tomorrow and close by Friday afternoon." I looked at the number. $1,900,000. That's $900,000 below market value, I said, my voice steady. "This apartment was appraised at $2.8 million last year." "I know," Patricia said. "And if we listed it, staged it, and courted buyers for 6 months, we could probably get 2.7. But you asked for 48 hours. This is what 48 hours looks like. It's a fire sale, Elizabeth. You're bleeding equity." I stared at the contract. $900,000. It was a fortune to lose in a heartbeat. Anthony would have an aneurysm. He viewed every cent as a measure of his personal worth. To sell his crown jewel for a discount was a greater sin to him than adultery. For a split second, the old Elizabeth hesitated. The thrifty wife who clipped coupons despite her husband's millions, the careful manager who audited the grocery bills. I thought about walking away. I thought about waiting. But then I looked around the room. I looked at the walls I had painted cloud white because Anthony said dove white was too depressing. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of a city I had never felt part of. And I realized something profound about the last 25 years. I had fallen victim to the gambler's fallacy. In economics, it's the dangerous belief that if you keep investing in a failing venture, eventually it has to turn a profit. You tell yourself, I've already put in 10 years, I can't leave now, or it was all for nothing. I've already forgiven him 3 times. Maybe the 4th time will be the charm. You keep throwing good money, good years, good energy, good love after bad, terrified to walk away because walking away means admitting the initial investment is gone forever. I had treated my marriage like a bad stock. I refused to sell. I had spent decades averaging down, hoping for a market correction that was never coming. I looked back at the number on the paper, $1,900,000. The missing $900,000 wasn't a loss. It was an exit fee. It was the price of expedited shipping on my freedom. If I waited 6 months to get full price, I would have to spend 6 more months being Anthony's wife, fighting his lawyers, enduring his gaslighting, and living in this glass cage. Was my freedom worth $900,000? I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen, Anthony's pen, and clicked it open. It's not a loss, Patricia, I said, looking her in the eye. It's the cost of doing business. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, Elizabeth Henley. The loops of my signature were large and aggressive, taking up more space than I had allowed myself to occupy in years. Patricia pulled the paper back and slipped it into her folder. She checked her watch. I'll call the title company. We're on the clock. Do it, I said. And Patricia, tell the buyer he can keep the furniture. I'm not taking anything that touched this life. The closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning at a title company downtown. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and printer toner, the scent of bureaucracy. I sat across from Patricia and the escrow officer, a man named David, who had the nervous habit of tapping his pen against his teeth. We were 90% of the way through the stack of documents. The deed transfer, the wire instructions, the tax affidavits. My wrist was starting to cramp from signing Elizabeth Henley over and over again, signing away the penthouse, the view, and the last tether to my old life. Then David stopped tapping. He frowned at his computer screen, typed something, and frowned again. Mrs. Henley, he said, his voice hesitant. We have a slight issue with the preliminary title report update. A flag just popped up in the system. I put my pen down. What kind of flag? It appears there is a pending loan application against the property, he said. It was filed 3 days ago. A rush application with a private equity group in New York. Hard money lender. I looked at Patricia. She looked as confused as I felt. That's impossible, I said. The property is free and clear. There is no mortgage. And I certainly didn't apply for a loan. David turned his monitor so I could see it. The application is for $2 million. It lists the penthouse as collateral. And it includes a spousal consent form, signed and notarized. He slid a printed copy of the document across the table. I stared at the bottom of the page. There, in blue ink, was my name, Elizabeth Henley. But it wasn't my signature. The loop on the E was too tight. The slant was wrong. It was a forgery. And not just any forgery. I recognized the aggressive, sharp strokes immediately. It was Anthony's handwriting, trying to mimic mine. The realization hit me like a physical blow, followed instantly by a wave of cold, clarifying rage. Anthony hadn't just left me for his mistress. He was broke. Or at least, cash poor enough that he needed $2 million of liquid capital to fund his Dubai expansion and likely his new lifestyle with Sarah. He had tried to mortgage the penthouse behind my back, using my name and my property as his personal piggy bank. He must have assumed I would be too devastated to check the title, or too passive to ever sell the place. He thought he had time to get the loan approved, take the cash, and pay it back before I ever noticed. "Mrs. Henley?" David asked, watching my face carefully. "If this isn't your signature, we have a major problem. This is fraud. We need to stop the sale and launch an investigation. It could take months to clear the title." "No," I said. The word came out sharp, like a gunshot. I looked at the forged signature again. This changed everything. This wasn't a divorce anymore. This wasn't a civil dispute over assets. Anthony had committed felony bank fraud and identity theft. If I stopped the sale now, he would have time to cover his tracks. He could withdraw the application, claim it was a misunderstanding, or blame a clerical error. But if I closed the sale, if the title transferred to the new owner today, the title company would be legally required to notify all pending lien holders that the collateral had vanished. The private equity firm would receive an alert that the property they were about to lend $2 million on had just been sold to a tech CEO. They would look at the application, they would see the forgery, and they would call the authorities. I looked up at David. "I don't want to stop the sale," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I want to accelerate it." But the fraud alert David's stamina. "Process the closing," I ordered. "Transfer the title. Let the system notify the lenders that the collateral is gone. Let them find out that the borrower tried to mortgage a house he doesn't own." Patricia's eyes widened. She understood exactly what I was doing. I wasn't just cutting Anthony off financially. I was handing him a prison sentence. "Are you sure, Elizabeth?" Patricia asked softly. "Once we record this, there is no going back. He will be arrested the moment he steps off that plane." I picked up the pen. "He stole 25 years of my life," I said. "I'm just returning the favor." I signed the final document. The deal was done. The trap was sprung. And Anthony was currently 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward a landing strip that I had just demolished. My phone pinged with a notification that was infinitely more satisfying than the flight alert from yesterday. Wire transfer received $1,900,000. Combined with my inheritance, the balance in my secret account now sat at nearly $3.5 million. A second later, the phone rang. It was Anthony. He never called. He texted, he emailed, he had his assistant call, but he never dialed the number himself unless it was an absolute emergency. I answered on the first ring. I didn't say hello. I just listened. "Elizabeth!" His voice was a distorted screech of panic and rage. In the background, I could hear the distinct, hushed murmurs of a high-end hotel lobby. "What did you do?" "My card just declined." The black card. Declined! In front of the concierge! "I imagine it did," I said, leaning back against the marble counter. The banks tend to freeze assets when a fraud alert is triggered on a major property transaction. "What fraud alert? What are you talking about?" "The one the title company filed an hour ago," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "When we discovered the forged loan application you submitted, using a house you don't own as collateral is a felony, Anthony. The sale of the penthouse just exposed it to every lender in the country." There was a silence on the other end so profound I could hear him breathing. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization of a man who knows the walls are closing in. You sold the penthouse?" he whispered. "Elizabeth, you can't. That's my base. That's my leverage. If I don't get that loan, the Dubai deal collapses. I'll be ruined." "You were ruined the moment you signed my name," I corrected. "The house is gone, Anthony. The locks are being changed as we speak. And the FBI usually investigates wire fraud involving sums over $1 million. I'd advise you not to come back to Seattle anytime soon." "But I have no cash," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Sarah, we haven't even checked in yet." "Sarah understands your vision, remember?" I said, quoting his text message back to him. "I'm sure she'll be happy to cover the room. She's an independent woman, isn't she? Elizabeth, please." "Goodbye, Anthony." I hung up. Then I popped the SIM card out of the phone and dropped it into the garbage disposal. I flipped the switch. The grinding noise was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. 6 months later, the rain here is different. In Seattle, it hammered against the glass, demanding attention. Here in Kyoto, it whispers. I sat on the wooden ingawa of the machiya. I bought a traditional townhouse built in the 1920s. It needed work. The plaster was cracked, the wood needed oiling, and the garden was overgrown. But I owned every inch of it. I heard through the grapevine that Anthony is currently awaiting trial for bank fraud. Sarah didn't pay for the hotel room. She took the next flight back to New York and sold her story to a tabloid. I picked up my sketchbook. For 25 years, I thought luxury was about square footage. I thought success was high ceilings, imported marble, and a view that looked down on everyone else. I was wrong. I used to live in a glass box worth millions, but I was poor in spirit. Now, I live in a wooden house that breathes. I learned that space is just dimensions you pay for, volume, height, width. It's cold, but a place is where your soul actually lives. It has memory, it has warmth, it holds you without trapping you. I finally have a place. I dipped my brush into the ink and began to draw. Not a blueprint for a client, not a stage set for a husband, but a garden, wild and imperfect, just for me. If you could start over anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go? Tell me in the comments. And if this story gave you hope, please share it. You never know who needs to be reminded that they are the architect of their own freedom.